So let's go ahead and get started. Today, I want to discuss tips for making worlds in logic games. And world making refers to the idea of drawing multiple diagrams at the start before you get into the questions, because you've determined that drawing multiple diagrams could be a way to solve the game efficiently. And I remember when I was studying, when I first started doing this, my mind was blown. And I just thought, this is how I'm going to become good at games. And the thing is, it did work a lot, but I encountered situations where I would find myself drawing 6, 7, 8 different diagrams at the start, or I would find myself making worlds based on just a mistaken interpretation of a rule, and then things would backfire, disastrously. So I want to convey to you today just some of the general tips and best practices that I try to follow myself in order to use this world strategy effectively. So that means, what are situations where it's a good idea to draw worlds? What are situations where it's not so good? What are situations where it's kind of in between, and it depends on your personal preference. All right. So we'll start with some general principles. We'll talk about afterwards tips on how to actually draw the worlds on your paper. And then we'll practice on a couple of games. We probably won't work through every single question because the focus will be more on the setup. But we will work through some questions as well. And then I hope to reserve maybe the last 20 minutes or so for just questions, if you have any at the end that you didn't want to bring up earlier. All right. So let me go ahead and get into the general tips for making worlds. So the way I think about it is, there are 2 requirements for when I want to make worlds, or at least when I want to strongly consider making worlds. And I want to make sure that you guys can read this. So let me go ahead and bring this up. The first requirement is only 2 or 3 options for how a particular rule plays out. And so if, let's say, you have a block rule and it can fit in 5 different places, right? That's a pretty common thing when it comes to ordering games. You have 7 spots, and then you have a block rule that can go in 5 different spaces. Generally speaking, that's not going to be a good rule to draw worlds on. If that block only goes in 2 or 3 places, however, at least in the way that I do games, it's almost an automatic split. And it becomes automatic if I meet one of these 2 things on the right. Can I see a clear impact on another rule? Or do I feel like it's going to help me just visualize what's happening in the game? All right. Now, I will say that sometimes drawing 4 to 6 worlds can be okay, but I would reserve that for just situations where you are 100% certain that it's going to be helpful, because you've done some kind of split into 4 worlds in a very similar situation, or you're just otherwise, very good at games. Then, some of the tips that I'm advising you of here, you can break them, of course, because everyone has their own personal style. All right. But this is how I think about it. The very first question, got to have 2 or 3 options, and only 2 or 3 options for how a particular rule plays out. And if you don't meet that, then probably that's not a good rule to split on. All right. Now, what does impact on another rule mean? That's, that's where the difficult part is, I think. Impact on another rule, to me, clearly refers to when the rule you're splitting on involves a letter that's also mentioned in another rule. All right. That is a pretty good indication that something is going to happen when you split on that rule. But some impacts are more significant than others. And so there's probably going to be times where you think there is some interaction, but I just don't feel like it's worth it to make that split. And that's totally fine. All right. These items on the board here, these are what I would say are necessary conditions, right? But they're not sufficient conditions for making worlds. even if you meet what's on this board, you don't have to do worlds. You may find that as you start drawing out your diagrams, that it's not working out. Like you don't find anything else out. And it's totally fine to then choose a different strategy, right? I think where people run into a mistake when doing worlds is that they just keep going forward, just thinking that they have to keep going with their first instinct on how to approach the game, even if it's not being productive. All right. So that's probably the most important thing to keep in mind about making worlds. Now I wanted to just practice a little bit our assessment of whether we should make worlds on a couple of examples. So here we have an ordering game where we have 7 different variables. Let's say these are 7 people who are engaged in a b-boying competition, all right? And they're each going to do their little spins one at a time. So the first rule says that L or M is going to go first. The second rule says P is going to perform their dance immediately before Q. So it's a PQ block. S is not going to go last. And O is going to go sometime before R. Can I ask you, when you look at this set of rules, is this a game where you think it would be helpful to make worlds? And if so, on what rule? So feel free to type in the chat, or, if you want to share your thoughts, just let me know. Let me apply those criteria that I talked about earlier, right? L and M, 2 options, right? L is in 1 or M is in 1. Does putting L in 1 have an impact on another variable, on another rule? Is there another rule that mentions L?
No.
So I don't know if that is necessarily useful. What about the M?
No.
Put M in 1. Let me actually walk through that, right? Because actually I would be thinking about this with these rules, right? PQ, the PQ. Let me see. It looks like it can go in 2-3, right? It looks like it can go in 3-4. It looks like it can go in 4-5. It looks like it can go in 5-6. And doesn't it also look like it can go in 6-7 as well?
Yes.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different spots. And on top of that, there's no other rule that mentions P or Q. So, I'm not going to say that it's absolutely useless and you're not going to get anything out of drawing out 5 different possibilities for the PQ. It can help you just get an overall sense of the game. But in my experience, this situation is going to suggest that the game is all about the individual questions and doing the work on the questions. And so I would say this is definitely not, it doesn't meet the criteria that I set out above. And so I'm not going to do it. Does that make sense? And if you, in your personal strategies, have become accustomed to drawing out worlds in a situation like this, and you're saying, well, you know what, 5 is not a big deal, I would encourage you to actually practice not doing that and seeing how you could solve the game without doing that, because you might find that drawing out 5 different possibilities is actually not going to help you solve the game. All right. And so let me show you guys. I want to compare that though to this situation, which is the exact same situation, except I've added this last rule, R is before Q. And so, Matt, you were saying something earlier in the previous example. You want to help me out with this one? And now, what do you think about splitting into worlds? Yeah. And the way that I'd probably want to do it is just think about the PQ and where it looks like it can go, right? So it has 2 things that have to come before it. So PQ, it looks like the earliest is 4-5, right? To leave room for the OR. And then we have 5-6 and then 6-7. So that's 3. In my style of doing games, it's almost 100% certainty. I mean, I would really say I would automatically split in this moment. And you know what? If it turns out that some of these worlds are not very helpful, it's not a big deal. So I see Reina also had the same idea. And so, Dorothy, I hope you're starting to see the difference here. Is like this is one where there's a connection between the rule that we wanted to split on, and there's also fewer options. When you don't have that, when you don't meet those two conditions that I described above, the worlds is probably not going to be a good strategy. It's not impossible, and for you personally and others personally, it could help them. But I, in my experience, think it could be holding you back as well, because there's certain skills that you want to develop and that we'll talk about and hopefully demonstrate too. There's certain skills involved in solving games without worlds that are really important. And, if you're still struggling with games, even though you feel like you've been doing worlds quite a bit, everyone tells you to do them. It could be that you need to pull back a little bit. All right. Now, I just want to take a look at one more example before we move on to some other points. Here we have a grouping game. All right. Let's say we have 3 pairs of people. What are they going to be doing? They are science lab partners. Okay. The first rule says T and Y can't be paired together. The second rule says if R is in 1, then X is in 2. S is in 2, so I already put that in. And S and Z can't go together, so I've already drawn that in. Think a little bit about whether we would split in this situation, and if so, on what rule. So Reina's saying Z in 1 and Z in 3, I think you meant. Yeah, Reina, if you want to unmute yourself, could you share your thoughts on that? Yeah, what's interesting to me is it seems like you really wanted to get to the R rule when it
Yeah.
came to the split. I agree with that. But then starting with the Z, again, it's not wrong, but I'm going to apply those 2 criteria I talked about earlier. All right. So the Z has 2 options. Is there another rule that mentions Z that we have not already accounted for? Basically, do rules 1 and 2 interact with Z?
No.
So I'm not inclined to think the Z split is a good option. Now, the R, though, is a good option, I think, because if R is in 1, then X would have to go in 2. And do you see the significance of putting something in this spot over here? Why do I like putting something in that spot?
Because you're done with 2.
Because I'm done with 2. We fill up the groups. That allows me to do something with TY, right? Mm-hmm. So when we put R in 1, that's going to lead to some good stuff. Now, if that's the first world, R is in 1, what would be the other world or worlds if we started with the R? What do you guys think? We could put R in 1. And then should we just do R in 1 and R not in 1? Or maybe we should, yeah.
R3, R1, R2, R3.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because when you put the R in 2, again, it fills up group 2, doesn't it? And so we like that in grouping games, filling up a group. Now, the world where R is in 3, we'll see what happens there. But even if the first 2 are useful and the last one is not that filled out, it's still a good decision, I think. And so does that make sense here? Oh, and Sam, let me ask you about TY, because I don't think R is the only way to split. So Sam, feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts on TY. Yeah, I want to actually show you the mechanics of doing the split. Because and so what I'll do is in a different color, hopefully you guys can read that. Let me know if you can't. I'm going to go ahead and just show you the kinds of notations that I think would be good. So the first world is R is in 1, right? And then that means X is in 2. And so Sam, you are right that T is in 1 or 3. But do you see how there might be a way to capture both of those possibilities in a single diagram? Like, do I need to draw a T here and then put the Y in 3? And then a T over here with the Y in 1? I think that does make sense. But basically, if you have this slash notation available to you as one of your strategies, it cuts down the number of possibilities. By the way, the Z, of course, would then go here, right? So that's the first world. Let me go ahead and draw the second world. So now we're going to put the R in 2, right? What happens with the TY? We're going to split it up, right? We always have to split up two letters that hate each other, two letters that can't go in the same group when there's only two open groups left. What do we do with the Z and the X? Can we just capture it all in one diagram here? Yeah, so Ben is saying they flop. It's the same thing, right? Because the Z and the X, they're interchangeable with each other right now. And so this, by the way, I remember a time distinctly where I would have drawn two diagrams for something like that. I would have put, okay, one version where Z is in 1, one version where Z is in 3. And I find that part of getting better at games is just learning about and also, sometimes practicing your own kind of notation, but learning about ways to capture variability in just one diagram rather than trying to play it out. Because if you start drawing it out, that's how it becomes 6, 7, 8 different diagrams. And it's just not as efficient that way. All right. So let's go ahead and do the last world. Now, if I were a little bit on my scratch paper, I do try to leave a lot of room in between the worlds, but just because I'm limited to this square, I'm going to go ahead and draw them pretty close. And in the last world here, remember, we're going to do the R in 3. And if the R is in 3, the Z is still going to be in 1 or 3. What do I do at this point? Should I split the TY into like 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3? Should I split the Z again in 1 or Z in 3? What do you guys think you would do if you encountered this situation? I know a lot of people would split here, right? Maybe we could just draw one version where Z is in 1 and then another version where Z is in 3. Is that something anyone would have the idea of doing? Great, yeah. So Matt and Monica are saying leave it open. And then that's because you guys, I think, are a little bit more experienced, right, with doing this strategy. That's what I would do as well. The thing is, if you wanted to draw another version where Z is in 1 and then Z is in 3, that actually does seem pretty useful, because if Z is in 3, you could split up the T and the Y. And then if Z is in 1, does it make sense that the TY rule doesn't matter anymore when the Z is in 1? So everything becomes a floating or free agent variable. So, if that's not evident to you from looking at this, then when you practice, I think going one step further and splitting this again makes sense. But as you get more experienced, I really want to encourage you to pull back on that and trust that you can handle the openness on the questions when you need to. And if you're ever in a jam, you know how to go back and figure it out. So sometimes what will happen is maybe I left things open and then I got to a question, I just couldn't figure it out. At that point, I could say, you know what, screw it. I'm going to write what I thought I didn't want to, but I know it's a way to totally solve the game. All right. So let me go ahead and take a look at the next tip. And it's something we've already been talking about as we were discussing the other examples, right? What rule do I use? Well, generally, one that produces fewer worlds, one that connects to more worlds, and one that fixes more things in place. Those are just different factors. And sometimes it just doesn't really matter, right? You could split on almost any rule. Well, I wouldn't say almost any rule, but sometimes in a game, there's like 2 or 3 different rules that are equally useful to split on, or almost equally useful, because they're all going to have some interaction with each other. So don't take 30 seconds trying to decide the best rule. If you have a quick reaction and you think something is useful, then I'd say go ahead and do it. All right. Okay. This is also another thing that we just talked about. Should we split the worlds again on another rule? And when you're first trying this strategy out, if you're really into it and you think it's helpful, you're going to want to split and split and split, right? But I would say be careful about it and try to keep your overall split worlds to 4. So basically, this is ideal, right? Just 2 worlds. If you did want to split one of them again into 2 more, And so you end up with this world, this world, this world. That's okay, right? If world 2 also had some similar split and you ended up with 4 worlds, that's okay too. I don't want to discourage you from doing that too much. I will do it as well. But what I don't want you to do is then to take one of these worlds and do this split over here. Again, you can do it that way. If you're really good at games, you can basically solve games any way you want. But this is where people run into trouble, I'd say. All right. But generally speaking, the point is, let's not draw more than 4. Sometimes 5 is okay. Sometimes 6 is okay. But, generally not. And the final point that I want to leave you with when it comes to general principles is there's no game that actually requires worlds to solve efficiently. So if you're ever in a situation where you're trying to draw the worlds, it's not working out, you're getting confused, you find it difficult to keep referring back to the worlds and, keep track of like, okay, I'm in world number 2 and 4. And then maybe you also have to like draw additional diagrams because it's hard to visualize what's happening in those worlds when you have a new condition. You don't need to do this strategy. But I think it's useful to practice using this strategy because a lot of the skills that are involved are the exact same skills you use when solving games, solving individual questions. And so as you understand what makes worlds effective and what makes worlds not effective, that will just inherently improve your ability to solve games. So one thing that I'll be doing with some of the exercises today is maybe after we draw the initial worlds and try a question, I'll also ask you how we would do the problem without drawing the worlds. And that's something that I encourage you to do in your own practice. Solve games in different ways. All right. So let's take a look at some best practices for drawing the worlds, and then we'll get into some games. First of all, try to copy the notations from your main diagram for each world. And so what I mean by that is, let's say this was our main diagram. And, we have drawn some rules directly in the diagram. I've seen too often, and I've also made this mistake, just a situation where as you draw your worlds or even do your work on individual questions, depending on how far away your main diagram is from what you're drawing, you might forget to write something like that over here. Or you might even just forget to write D/E in 4. And, once you've been burned by that a couple of times, I think you'll realize the usefulness of just actually recopying the initial notations. As you get better, you don't always need to, and I can't say that I always do it, but if you've had trouble with the situation that I've just described, forgetting about these rules, just start by recopying them. All right. Related to that, try not to write over your main diagram as your first world. Now, I know the temptation. It's like, well, I already drew these slots. Let me make that my first world. I don't need to draw out another set of slots, right? I think the problem with that is if you do have rules like this that were on your main diagram, I do like to preserve those because sometimes you're going to get a question. The last question could be a rule substitution question. It could be a question where they change one of the rules on you. And I do find it helpful to see what the general situation was like before I started to make the worlds. If you draw the worlds directly on your first diagram, you might just forget what was and what are things you drew that were a result of being in that world and a connection with another rule, and what were things you drew that were just always true from the initial start of the game. So that's something that I try not to do. The next thing that I want to make sure you at least think about is just being systematic about how you apply the rules in each world. So here's another kind of abstract diagram. I hope it makes sense. Let's say we have our 3 worlds, and then we have 3 rules left to apply. Basically, and Monica is saying that, I set a page with rules and 1 diagram. Page 2 for each question helps me. Yeah, I don't know if you need to use that much space, but I do encourage you to use a lot of space, and that's something that I'll get to later on. But you see, if I'm applying the rules to these worlds, here's what I want to do. There's 2 ways to do it. I'll start going world by world. In world 1, I'm going to go like this and apply all the rules to that world. And then I'm going to do the same with world 2, right? So that's one style of applying the rules to the worlds. Generally, what I try to do, I can't say I always do it. The other way that I might sometimes do it is go rule by rule and apply rule 1 to each world, and then do the same with rule 2, right? Either one is totally fine. I can't say one is always better than the other. But what you don't want to happen is just go by just flashes of insight and noticing things, right? If I'm applying rules to worlds, I don't want to be like, oh, you know what? I noticed rule 2 is going to have this impact in world 1. Oh, it also does something over here. Okay, let me move on to rule 3. Oh, rule 3 has this impact on, that is just so disorganized that you might just even forget to apply a rule either entirely or forget to apply it to one of your worlds. And if you have struggled with making effective diagrams and using this strategy effectively, this is probably, a bad approach, right? So just be systematic and just make sure that you're being organized about it. Ben is making a point here that you're only allowed 5 pieces of scratch paper. So you do have to be careful about using too much scratch paper. You are allowed to use both sides. So it is like 10 sides. And in addition, unless they've updated the rules recently, I don't think there's a requirement of paper size. So one thing you can do is get like legal size paper. It's like slightly bigger. I probably would not come in with like a 2x3 poster board and say that it's, this is 5 pieces of scratch paper. The proctor may not look on that kindly. But you can use, slightly bigger paper. Another thing, by the way, is that you can use graph paper or dotted paper. So if that helps you keep things organized, then that can be a useful purchase. All right. So a couple of other things that we'll go through, and I'll go through this quickly because we'll apply it to some games. Once you've determined that a rule, you've already applied it to every world, then it's done, right? If you know what's going to happen with that rule in every world, you don't have to think about it. So just check it off. Sometimes some people like to cross it off of their rules list. I don't like crossing things off because, as I mentioned before, sometimes there will be questions where you need to go back to the initial rules. And then this other tip here is about emphasizing rules that are still live. And what I mean by that is, let's say after you've thought about all the rules and how they apply to the worlds, rule 3, you're just not sure how it applies in worlds 2 and 3. So rule 3, you already applied it to world 1. But in 2 and 3, it's still uncertain how it's going to apply. What I would do is I might even write rule 3 directly next to those diagrams to just keep it top of mind. I don't want to forget about applying that. And too often what happens with students who are using the strategy is when they're in these worlds, they just don't automatically apply rule 3. It takes them 10 seconds to realize, oh yeah, I have to think about rule 3. And I just don't want that to happen. So I'm going to make it directly next to the diagram, or I'll just draw arrows, or I might just circle the rule like I've done here. And that'll just tell me, hey, remember to think about that. All right. So, the final thing that you want to make sure to do is to draw your free agent or floating variables next to each world if you can, right? If it's easy to do that, because people lose time from just thinking, okay, who else is left? And then they go back to their list of letters. It just takes time to realize who's left. If you do that at the start and just draw it next to the diagram, it's going to cut out 5-10 seconds of wondering. All right. So are you guys ready with going into some actual games?